right, welcome back. So our next quadrilateral that we're going to look at is called a rhombus. So the thing that you need to look for on the rhombus has four congruent sides. That's what you're looking for with a rhombus. So a square is a rhombus because it has four congruent sides. A parallelogram with four congruent sides is a rhombus. So that's the main thing you're looking for with a rhombus is the four congruent sides. If you see that all four sides have the same length, the same size, then it's a rhombus. That includes squares. So things about the rhombus is all sides are congruent. That's the most important thing. Opposite angles are congruent. So as you can see, this is an acute angle, this is an acute angle, this is an obtuse angle, this is an obtuse angle. So that's what makes it different from a square, is that a square has 90-degree angles in every corner. The rhombus has two acute angles and two obtuse angles. Opposite sides are parallel. Once again, if I drew lines on these sides, they would go on forever and they would never ever touch. So opposite sides are parallel. And that's gone for all of our quadrilaterals so far. So these are all parallelograms as well. Alright, so all sides congruent, opposite angles are congruent, and opposite sides are parallel. That's your rhombus. Alright, next one. Is your parallelogram. Looks like your rhombus, right? But here's the difference. With your rhombus, all four sides are congruent. With your parallelogram, the four sides are not congruent. These two sides are congruent, and these two sides are congruent, but they're different. All right, these two sides are longer than the top and bottom. All right, so that's the difference between the parallelogram and the rhombus. So the parallelogram looks like a rhombus, but the sides are not all congruent. So that's the easiest way to tell the difference. But also, a parallelogram can be like literally a rectangle is a parallelogram. So a rhombus is a parallelogram. So it's a special type of parallelogram. A square is a special type of parallelogram. A rectangle is a special type of parallelogram. All of those are parallelograms. So a rectangle is a parallelogram. A square is a parallelogram, and a rhombus is a parallelogram. But they have to have something specific. So the rectangle is a parallelogram with four 90-degree angles. A square is a parallelogram with four 90-degree angles and four congruent sides. And a rhombus is a parallelogram with four congruent sides. So all of those are parallelograms. That's the part that confuses people. Parallelogram is all of these things because all of these things follow the same rules. They have opposite sides that are congruent, even though the rhombus and square have all sides congruent. Opposite angles are congruent. So with this one, we have two obtuse and two acute angles. With a rectangle and a square, you have opposite 90-degree angles, but they're still congruent. Opposite sides are parallel. They'd go on forever and never touch. So once again, if we drew our lines on the sides, it shows that they are parallel lines. They go on forever and never touch on the sides. They only intersect on the corners. So, and then, oops, oops. So those are the things that make your parallelogram. So remember, a parallelogram is kind of your first generic term after quadrilateral, and then rectangles, squares, and rhombuses are parallelograms. All right, last ones. Got a couple more. Trapezoid. All right, so trapezoid is one of the ones that does not follow parallelogram rules. A trapezoid is not a parallelogram. Oops, that's a P. Not a parallelogram. The reason why a trapezoid is not a parallelogram is because this set of lines right here is not parallel. These would actually touch eventually. And in fact, the cool thing about a trapezoid is when those lines touch, it would make a triangle. So we'll come back and we'll talk about the trapezoid and some others, and then you're done.